Well, good morning from France. I am in the Champagne region. I'm just a few miles away from my first stop this morning, which was to be the Russian cemetery for the members of the Russian Expeditionary Force. And I happened to be driving past, and this was not a stop that was on my list, but when I saw it, I couldn't help but come here. This is the National Cemetery for the French, for Auberive. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, unfortunately, and I took French in high school. But it's the burial place of 7,000 members of the French army who were killed in the battles for Champagne. But what stood out to me about this one is that right behind it is the cemetery for 5,000 members of the German army who fought here and died. It's just an incredible thing. I have never, and I'm sure that there are others like it here, but I've never been in a place where the men from opposing armies, the men who killed each other, are buried basically in the same cemetery. One in front and one in the rear. But this was obviously done intentionally, as they would have had to bring the bodies here. So it's an incredible thing. And I believe there's also a very small Polish cemetery in here somewhere. So we're just going to look around a little bit. I gotta say, it's really quite surreal to be standing where I am and have Germans to my left, and then just on the other side, the French. 12,000 men, boys, who never made it home. One side defending their country, the other fighting for their Kaiser in a war that I don't think any of them asked for. It's very sad. And you see these cemeteries all over here. Most of the cemeteries that I've been to so far here have similar sections to this, especially for the Germans. They tend to be in the back. They're the mass burial pits, in addition to all of the soldiers that are buried with markers. And typically, each one of the German markers has 4 names on it, 2 on the front, 2 on the back. Sometimes you'll see 3 on one side, but then you see these mass burial pits in the back. And in this case, this one's got a number of names, and I would guess that these are soldiers who were never identified, but they're fairly certain would be buried here because this is the cemetery for the men who fought in this region. Now, speaking of this region, it's interesting. Obviously, it's been 100 years since this was fought, but there's nothing here. I've been driving past nothing but empty farmland for the better part of a half hour. Now, granted, I'm going to be coming up into a little bit more of a civilized area here in a few minutes, because I'm just about 3 miles away from where I'll be visiting the Russian cemetery and church, but I don't know that there's a whole lot there. It's probably just a small village. But it's very flat here, reminiscent a lot of being in Iowa or Kansas or Nebraska, some of the states of the Great Plains in the United States. It's very much like that here in the Champaign region. The other thing that it's impossible to miss when you visit German cemeteries here, and all the German cemeteries I've seen so far have this. These are First World War graves, but these are just a generation before the Holocaust that was perpetrated on Europe by the Germans. And every German First World War cemetery has a number of Jewish soldiers buried in it. Men who fought for a country that just 20 some odd years later would have considered them worthy of death in a camp. Just an interesting thing to think about. So we have the French World War I cemetery, the German World War I cemetery, and then right here is a monument to the Polish Army of World War II. And these graves that you see behind it on either side, it's a small section of the cemetery, but these are Polish soldiers who fought and apparently died on the Western Front. They were probably exiles from their own country. Remember, Poland was invaded on September 1st of 1939, but it was the spring of 1940 when France was invaded. And so it seems logical to me that these men died fighting alongside the French. And you can see here, many of them say that they're unknown French or Polish soldiers, but also some that are known. And most of the dates are 16th June 1940, 16th June, 14th of April 1940, 10th of May 1940. So gives you a sense there, and a lot of them don't even have plaques on them, so they're probably unknown as well. Well, now I stand corrected, as the front section in front of that Polish monument, these are Polish soldiers of the First World War. So they were buried here, and then obviously they buried the Second World War soldiers in the same section right behind them. So same thing here. Instead of saying mort pour la France, which would be died for France, it says mort pour la patrie, which I'm not sure what that means, but I'm guessing it means fatherland in Polish, perhaps. But here we go, 14th of October, 1918, 11th of June, 1919, so maybe in the flu pandemic, 29th of September, 1919, so some of them died even after the war was over, but they were still here. So I had a very well planned out itinerary for all 6 of my days here in France, and it keeps getting messed up, but I'm totally okay with that because it's going to give me an excuse to come back. I keep passing things that I just have to stop and see, and one of the things that I found as I was driving from the Russian Orthodox Cemetery to the site of the Lost Battalion was I saw this huge monument up on top of the hill here in the Champagne region, and it is the Ossuary for Champagne, and it contains the bones of 10,000 soldiers of multiple nationalities whose bodies were recovered in and around Champagne. There are Czechoslovakian soldiers who are there. There are American soldiers who are inside of there. There are French soldiers, obviously, probably German soldiers. Just a mile or two down the road, there was a huge cemetery, probably 10,000 more bodies. And that's one of the things I'm discovering about the Western Front that just really gets your attention and helps you to understand the scale of this conflict. There's a lot of open farmland here in Champagne. In fact, you can see absolutely I bet you can see for 10 or 15 miles from the spot that I'm standing, and I'll give you some looks at the landscape, although it's probably difficult to tell. Every 5 or 10 minutes, you come across a little crossroads with maybe 5 or 10 buildings. And every one of those crossroads seems to have a cemetery with 5 or 10,000 dead soldiers buried right outside of it. They're everywhere. I mean, imagine the Gettysburg National Cemetery has something like 3,000 Union soldiers buried in it. Imagine the Gettysburg National Cemetery, but one every 5 or 10 minutes when you're driving. That's the Western Front. But what was really cool when I stopped here to see this incredible monument is that right behind it, there are trenches. These are the first legit World War I trenches I've seen so far, because there weren't really any of those at Belleau Wood yesterday where I was. But they're here, big time. And there's also some barbed wire, and I'm going to let you take a look at that in a minute. I don't know if it's original, but I have no reason to believe it isn't original. But these are legit World War I trenches, and it's just an absolutely gorgeous view. So let's look around a little bit.